Hello, I'm Joan. I'm a Canadian family physician who also works as a restorative medical educator, facilitator, and coach. I create spaces that rehumanize the work of healthcare. I'm creating this podcast to remind myself, as well as anyone else working in a helping profession, that when you are working and caring for your human patients, you are the other human in the room. Hey there, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So today, I have an idea for an episode that came to me in the midst of a conversation that I got to be a part of two of some of my favorite. I have many favorites, but these two people are some of my many favorite healthcare humans that I've encountered. Um, I'm trying to decide whether to fully dox them or not. Their names are Catherine and Aaron. I'll just say their first names. They're both fabulous physicians working in different contexts. And the conversation we were having was actually about palliative care. And it was just very striking to me listening to this conversation about palliative care and sort of helping the field of palliative care to have more influence over the rest of medicine. And in the midst of this conversation, Aaron shared this model of the palliative approach that a colleague of hers, Joshua Shad, I'm trying to give credit to him, and I'm forgetting the other person's first name, but the last name is Tuzel. They published some papers about what they consider to be the palliative approach based on research they've done, qualitative analysis of different studies and approaches that how people have defined palliative care in the past. And they wanted to sort of summarize them into what's a simplified way to think of the palliative approach, especially I think in the context. I've read the articles, but it was just a little while ago and I didn't do a deep read, but it appeared to be in the context of how you can apply them to any part of medicine and in particular primary care. And so when I heard Aaron describe the palliative approach model, I kind of had this light bulb moment of we can use this in so many different areas because in some ways it just distills a lot of what I talk about on this podcast. And there's something kind of neat and slightly disruptive and submersive of being what if we applied the palliative approach to all parts of our patient care, as well as all parts of our system planning, all parts of our planning leadership roles, as well as for each of us to internally be having a palliative approach to how we view our careers. I just think it's so delightful, especially because people think palliative is down and dreary and just only for end of life. But as anyone I know who practices palliative care always talks about, it's not only for end of life. It is very relevant and honestly, certainly the only kind of care we typically want to be offering at end of life, but it is absolutely relevant for all areas of life. And especially this model, which has three components. So basically, they were saying a palliative approach is any sort of approach to a situation, a way of thinking about a situation that incorporates these three elements: considering the whole person, focusing on quality of life, and acknowledging mortality. That's it. When I heard her, it was so clear, and it's so nice that it's succinct. It's three, you can kind of remember it. And I was like, well, yes, that is a great way to approach all people. I think people can get a little hung up on, especially the mortality acknowledgement, but I think it gets us into trouble in all areas of life, in particular medicine, if we forget to acknowledge that all humans are mortal. I think actually, if we're not acknowledging it or not, it's still a shadow in the room of we're mortal. And that's often we're kind of trying to run away from that and run away from the idea that any of our patients could die. And yet 100% of our patients die eventually. And same with us. So that one I think is so important. And it also speaks to, my old episode about the book 4,000 Weeks. What happens to how you prioritize your life? What happens to how you manage your time and your life and your daily schedule if you remember that if you're lucky, you get 4,000 weeks on this earth because that's like 80 something years. So like the mortality acknowledgement, I think is so essential. And then the other two pieces, considering a whole person. Like, I think a lot of what, maybe functionally, systematically, it makes sense to chop people up into little bits and have one person see you for the liver and one person to see you for the pancreas. And I think it's useful to have people who have deep knowledge about all the different parts of our body. And I wish we all had a deeper training and a deeper, richer culture that really prioritized and supported the notion that even when everyone in the room is very focused on helping one organ to work well, we remember that that organ lives inside a whole person. I think a lot of what ends up happening that's harmful physically, psychologically, for sure, to patients and causes this moral distress in us is when we feel pressured to ignore the whole person and only focus on one part of it. Like an example I can think of is like even just like when we're so focused on not getting sued, we can't see the whole person, like those sorts of things, right? And so practicing witnessing the whole person, even in the midst of those other pressures, I think I would love if we were all thinking about that more. I think sometimes we get tripped up about if we think about the whole person, that means we are responsible for the whole person. So now I have to like do my patient's taxes or something. I don't think that's what we're talking about here. We can acknowledge and witness and really take in and treat a person as a whole person without now having to be their parent, right? And so that I think is maybe where some of even patient-centered care can start to get into codependency or feeling like you have to be sort of babysitting, managing, chasing after your patients about all of their business, when that's not necessarily what it means to just have an approach to a person as a whole person. In fact, if you think about it, if you really saw that whole person as a whole autonomous person, it actually becomes a lot easier to be like, look at that whole person. Look at how much they are capable of. Yes, they are struggling with these things. Maybe they're struggling to take their meds. Maybe they're struggling to make it to appointments. And look at all the things they are still doing for themselves. Look at how they're getting to this place or that place. Look at how they have this relationship or that relationship. Seeing them as a whole person actually makes it less likely that you're going to feel as like pulled towards, obligated to act in any kind of way towards them. You can be like, hello, whole person. I am a whole person too. And how may I assist you today? What do you want me to assist you with? That's how I kind of see the whole person approach piece of this. And then that middle one, the quality of life focus. Oh my gosh. Like there's so much about mortality benefits of things. And that's important because we are acknowledging mortality, morbidity, even just like side effects. I've had some recent patient encounters, and this isn't like critical in a way that's like they're bad and evil or anything. But a thing I witness is that sometimes, especially like hospital-based settings, certain specialists, and I won't even say the entire specialty, but I have witnessed certain individual doctors in the midst of a certain specialty that are very focused on getting patients on all the meds and from all the studies that mean that if you add them all up, that you've absolutely optimized their mortality risk. And that's like they're not being evil as they do that. But then what happens is that patient comes and talks to me as their family physician, and they like can't stand up without almost passing out. Okay, I'm talking about cardiology because I feel like this is like and this isn't like I'm not trying to like call out cardiologists in particular. This is just like one example, and not all cardiologists, etc. But like sometimes they can be on so many meds, and like a common side effect when you're on so many meds that do support your heart and kidneys, they also happen to lower your blood pressure, feeling fatigued, feeling drained, low energy, and particularly feeling lightheaded, presyncopal or syncopal, very common side effects. And so then you're doing this balance where it feels like quality of life isn't as important as at bringing the percent of mortality risk down to the absolute lowest decimal. And just the notion of, I love how in this approach, they're each given equal weight. It's not like you like say, who cares? Die whenever you want. Just focus on quality of life per se. Like they're both to be held. Like you can't see me if you're listening, but like I've got like an open palm and it's like holding whole person, quality of life, mortality in equal measure. Like to me, I just find that a very helpful way to hold those. So then I'm having different kinds of conversations with my patients where it's like, what matters to you? Oh, you would like to be able to function in your day-to-day life, so do things you enjoy, acknowledging that, or optimizing your risk as best you can, but and making sure that in the meantime your body is not so impacted by the treatments that are in theoretically and like theoretically helping this particular person's risk, right? Because the studies were done on this particular person. So like trying to balance those, like it's such a richer experience even for me. And I would be curious if anyone listens is a cardiologist, like how much time do you guys spend talking about quality of life, or what are those conversations like? Do you feel like there's a lot of pressure amongst you all in your specialty, and a lot of pressure from patients of like, keep my heart ticking? So it feels like you have to, all of the conferences are all about all these studies and all the best new drugs. So you have to pile them all on. Otherwise you're a bad doctor that's not following the guidelines. Like from the outside, that is my hypothesis of what's going on. And I relate because the same thing happens in primary care for sure. And I just think, what if, like, so maybe it's up to the guidelines to be like, not just put in the, a footnote, also quality of life, but really to have that be a rich piece of like what we value as healthcare and what we value as patient care. And so it's like, choose from this menu, but stop before you get to the point where they're miserable in their lives. Because I mean, how could we even call it non-compliance? Like, what human wouldn't stop medication if it's making them feel terrible, right? Like, so would have more nuanced and supportive conversations, right? So that's how I see this palliative approach. I kind of want to rebrand it, not in a way, I'm not actually branding it, and I still very much honor that this came from these two individuals, and in their case they were talking palliative approach. But to me, it almost speaks more accurately to just like the human experience approach. Like if we took a human experience approach to each of our patients, it would involve noticing that the other person is a whole human, noticing that their quality of life is their human experience, basically. And so taking into account how whatever symptoms they're having, whatever tests we're sending them for, whatever treatments we're offering them will impact or have impacted their human experience, their quality of life, and that's a important piece to spend time noticing. Because if you don't spend time noticing it, your patient who's living that whole experience is going to act in ways that surprise you if you haven't taken it into account. It's a time-saving measure in the end, right? And then that last piece of the mortality acknowledgement. So if like for each person we recognize a deeply human part, a deep, very important part of the human experience is that it ends, and that is present in every conversation. Whether you're saying out loud, like, well, you're going to die someday, like, I probably won't start doing that. That seems a bit unnecessary. But to be like holding it in a way that makes that priorities more precious, that we know, like, how do you want to spend this time on earth, And so that's like, I'm just, first of all, just in terms of patient care, I just want to offer that model to you. I think it's beautiful and delicious. And like, that's the original intent, was talking about patient care. And having it be, how can you take a palliative approach? And if palliative is too laden with terms that feel uncomfortable to use on very young patients, human experience approach, whole person approach, often whole family approach, right? Like the original intent of things like the patient-centered clinical model is like just the whole context of a person. How does taking those into account actually save you time, help you feel more connected with your patients, like all of those good things? And the more I thought of it, because you know me, if you listen to more than one episode, I think about how everything that we have learned that is most effective with our patients is also most effective in different layers and levels of the healthcare system. It is most effective for us as individuals. It is also fascinating to consider if it would be more effective even when we think of it on a system level. Like the second thing I thought of as I was like listening to this conversation and had just written down frantically this amazing palliative approach model, like what if we had a palliative approach to every single new project that we started, new like pilot projects, they know it's going to be for a period of time, right? But have you ever either been a part of or witnessed something, some kind of initiative, some kind of committee that really appears to have outlasted its usefulness, but it's always existed, so it needs to keep existing, even though actually it's very deeply unsatisfying for the people on the committee. It doesn't appear that its original function even works or is important or helpful in the way that it's being run, and yet everyone feels like it can't stop because it's good work, it's important, it needs to be run. It's always run this way, it's a part of the charter of the institution, now we have to have it, like that kind of idea. So like, what if in general we understood from the start of a project that it was going to end? What if we understood at least that when we join a committee, we're going to leave that committee? And like some things have this, like they have terms and then they have turnover, and like that kind of element, that makes a lot of sense, right? And beyond, so that's what I'd consider like the mortality piece of it. So it's like knowing that everything has an arc of usefulness, an arc of like beginning, flourishing, and then potentially needing to end and or evolve into something new. Now we're talking reincarnation, if you will, for projects, for committees, right? So that and also people's participation on such committees, things like term limits, etc. I would say all of that I'd put in the mortality acknowledgement, where just like everything is going to have an end to usefulness, and sort of planning for that from the start, actually getting quite clear of like, how will we know when it's time to disband? How will we know, like, how will we know when we've served our purpose and it's over? Because otherwise the purposes can balloon because there's so many good ideas out there, and then like nothing much happens. And then the other two elements that you could also apply, right? So whole person, both in the case of like, say this is like a committee for trying to make some part of patient care better, considering the whole people that you're serving, sure, certainly. But I would say even before you start thinking of the whole people, both whole person and quality of life focus being very deeply enmeshed in my mind in like, who are the humans on this committee? Who are the humans who are leading as well as populating, doing the work of this project? Those whole people, and holding space and acknowledging and holding the tensions of the fact that this whole person works best in the morning and this whole person works best in the evening. And so really taking that into practical account. So you're really considering almost like that, like how can you support each of the humans on this committee, on this board, on this project, so that they feel like their whole personhood can be seen there, including like, you know, avoiding microaggressions and stuff. But even beyond that, like asking each person, how do you work best? How do you have your most creative ideas? Are you someone who needs to be very in the loop, or are you someone who like gets overwhelmed? Like really spending time of understanding how each works well together. I see very little of that. It's sort of like, well, we're running and just get used to it, and everyone tries to acclimate, and then, you know, people are scrolling on their phones. Like how would you be best engaged? What's your reason for being here, and how can we make sure that that's your center? um I heard a beautiful example of this, and I'm really hoping that at some point, I haven't invited her yet, I've got to, after I record this I'm going to actually email her and ask her. But a friend of mine um is on a kind of board, and it's for a specific kind of organization that has a specific purpose. I'm being vague because she hasn't given me permission to tell the story, as well as I hope she does tell the story someday on the podcast. But anyway, the singular purpose of this board, she was describing to me how she spent the time really getting to know the people on that board before they got too much into like what they were doing. It was more important to understand who these people were, what made them tick, not only like what their skill set and strengths were that they were bringing to the board, though that was important, but also like the why, and constantly remembering and reminding, like as they were doing the work, remembering and being like, okay guys, like why are we doing this work? What's your story? What's your story? And like recentering their whole reason for being there. And that just being a way to really have a thriving project. And like that's so inspiring to me. It's something that I want to consider how I can do more of that in either places that I'm leading. Like I think I will admit that even up to like literally doing this podcast now, I'm really reflecting on how I often am sort of thinking about the functioning and all the things on the agenda I have to get to. And I could certainly consider how all of those agenda items are going to be less effectively implemented or heard if I haven't really deeply connected and gotten to know the people on like that committee or working group with me. And everyone feels like they don't have enough time, but just like that's kind of the whole palliative thing. It's like I don't have time to consider the whole person. I'm just going to write a prescription. Like how that actually does in the end save you time because you know what you're all doing. You have consensus. It's upfront work, but that it's actually deeply essential and rich if you want to be effective together. Because otherwise, the whole project is a waste of time. And have you been a part of a project that felt like a waste of time? Because I have in various ways that we're not in any way critiquing the people on them, but like I have felt that ineffectiveness, that frustrated, pent up, unspent energy, that everyone was actually talking about different things in a room, deeply unpleasant. And this, I think, like this palliative approach or human experience approach, if you will, like starting with that, if you're doing like group work of any kind, I just think that's so important. And then that quality of life focus in particular, speaking to like not having weird policies where people aren't allowed to, like you get punished if you skip a meeting, not having accessibility, flexibility, like some of those things, even like in a way of like considering the settings in which you're having meetings or meeting together. Can they be somewhere delightful, yummy, fun, have a yummy snack? Like thinking about the quality of the experience. You don't have to like, I'm not picturing that you every time you'd have to like go to a 5-star restaurant per se, but that those sorts of things matter because if someone feels like their quality of experience has been taken into account, they're going to be more relaxed, they're going to feel more supported, and then that means their brain is going to give more creative ideas. And so like having that palliative approach to committees, I just think I'm so obsessed with that idea. I think that's so cool. And just thinking of the whole human experience of each of the people who populate that committee. And I would love anyone in research, first of all, like I know elements of this people do for sure, but like, you know, is there a way to measure if that ends up being more effective or not? It would kind of depend on what your research metrics are, I guess. But I at least could highly suspect the people on the committee would feel more satisfied about the work they're doing. And I've got to believe that that would at least have equal impact in terms of the spread of the project, in terms of it, whatever message or resource you're trying to have uptake that like people want to listen to and participate in things where the people who are already doing it seem like they're having a good time. Like I just think it's more likely to be effective. And likely would mean that there was like less committees because each might take a little bit more time and resource, but it would be like rich, deep investment. So then the third way that I thought that it would be really cool to see more explicit application of the palliative approach or human experience approach is to like, I mean, any kind of job. In my mind, at first, I thought of leadership roles, but honestly, like any kind of role that's a part of your career. So something that I heard a while back was like a good leader starts their succession planning the moment they take on that leadership role. Again, so succession planning being, what I mean by that being like, who's going to be your successor? The idea of starting to plan that from the moment you take on the role, I think is so powerful. That's something I've really taken in of like, what's my succession plan? I have one leadership role that I'm actively doing my succession planning and I've named out loud, I'm done with it after this year, who wants to come on with me? And I'm in the process of figuring out who's going to be with me and who can kind of, work with me. So then they feel supported in the transition. And I think it makes so much sense because otherwise people are in a role and then suddenly disappear, and then all the wisdom and knowledge that they gained is gone. Also, it can lead to people staying in leadership roles longer than their mind and body and spirit are really engaged in it. And you see that a lot too, hey? And so that being really tough. And so there's something about active succession planning, which is really like advanced care planning, if you will, speaking of palliative care, and that being that mortality acknowledgement piece, right? And then beyond that, like say you are the person who's designing a leadership role, say you're an organization and you're thinking about a leadership role, like how can you think of the whole person as you think through the role? How can you think of that person's quality of life as you think through that role? Do they have office space? Will they be supported? Are the number of tasks you're asking them to do supported by other people to help them do those tasks? Do they have a team behind them? Like, is it a realistic in terms of the amount of time? Is it realistic in terms of the compensation? Is that going to help them have a quality of experience? Like all of those things, if we think about how sort of like saying like what's going to make the experience of doing this role feel pleasant. It's going to have lots of stress, I'm sure, or lots of challenges. That's, doing some kind of work will have all of those feelings. But like if you've thought through them as a whole person and thought about their quality of life, I think that would really change and shift a bit of how we think of any role. And like leadership, people you're hiring underneath you, like, are you thinking through that whole person? Are you willing to be flexible if this whole person says like, these are the hours I'm able to work because otherwise, I have childcare obligations, and not feeling like we have to be equal with each person, but instead you can be more equitable, which is that each person gets what they need. And so some people would have different hours than others depending on what that whole person actually needs, right? So I just think that, again, the same model applied to that lens is very fascinating. And then the last area that I haven't mentioned is applying the palliative approach to you. You, the other human in the room, you, the healthcare human, on a day-to-day basis, first of all. So how are you currently taking into account that you are a whole person, and how are you not? What parts of your whole personhood have been neglected recently, and understandably because of deep socialization, to only view you as your working role, right? But that being one facet of who you are as a human. Who else are you as a human beyond the work you do that brings in income, and is there space in your life right now to have that whole person cared for, expressed, experienced by yourself and others that you love? That's a major issue. It's so much a major issue that actually that piece of it specifically is literally what I believe either this week or next week. I have not committed because I'm still working through the plan, but like soon you will hear like a special episode that's specifically describing what the creating space like coaching group is going to be in the fall. And this is like literally what it's about, is like noticing that for most of us, probably not just in healthcare, to be honest, many of us who are just like working adults, and certainly those of us in healthcare, certainly myself personally, didn't have time to feel like a whole person, didn't have space in my life to feel like a whole person beyond my role. Even like within healthcare, I felt like it, had to only have the one job. And what happens if you even diversify what kinds of work you do, so you can still be bringing in income, but you feel like you're expressing your whole personhood. Oh, I actually like being creative and earning income. I like having leadership roles. I like speaking and earning income. I like teaching and earning income, as well as practicing medicine. Like for me, those are things that helps me express more of my whole person through even ways I earn income, which that's pretty neat. And then also there are parts of me that will never earn income, like things I've talked about recently, like singing and dancing and connecting with friends and being a mom and like all, and being a partner, like all these things that like it feels so much better now that I have created space in my life for those things to happen too. I literally feel more like a whole person. And that means that each piece of it doesn't have so much pressure. I no longer resent my work for robbing me of my ability to feel like a whole person. I no longer care as much if my patients have opinions of me, etc., because I'm like, that's their opinion of the role I play as physician. I can even hear them out and see if, there's anything I can do about whatever critiques they have to give me, but it's not the whole of me. It's only one part of me. So like, it's the thing that I've been the most grateful for myself and proud of myself for doing over the past few years, which is why it's going to be the main thing that I am offering to support other people to do starting in the fall. So mini plug, watch this space, check the website. I don't have yet exactly when I'm going to describe that, but as you know, for the past couple of weeks, I've started to describe it because I'm starting to formulate it now a month earlier. So yes, that's like that whole person piece for like right now in your life. Are you accounting for your whole personhood? If you look at your life, does it match who you are as a whole person? Or are there pieces that are underexpressed? And like, what would happen if your approach to how you decide about your life, what you prioritize in your life, how much space you leave on your calendar in your life better reflected the whole person that was you? And then applying that second piece, when you make decisions, do you account for your quality of life? So many of us have been deeply socialized to account for the needs of other people, what other people are going to think of us, judgments of others, fear of punishment from others, organizations or people or whatever, that we think it's not important and selfish and unnecessary to think of the impact it would have on your quality of life. But I mean, in this approach, and I will say, in my experience, it's the most essential thing. Because if you say yes because something's very important and everyone wants it and they think you're the best person for it, and please, 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 but you already have a sense, or when you try it out, you recognize, I hate this. This is not what lights me up. This is not what brings me joy. Even if I'm quote unquote good at it, I don't like it. I'm not having a good time. See how quickly you become bad at that job, either by doing it but being snippy and resentful and irritated with everyone when they don't appreciate you, or actually like procrastinating doing that job and then blowing up at everyone. It's like, I didn't even want this in the first place. And like, if you feel like I'm calling you out, I'm calling myself out. That was me in the past, so I understand. But like, so now, a new invitation to do some amount of work, and literally every time you see a new patient, that's a new invitation. So it's like, what's the way I can, like, which parts of this will feel good to me? Or if it feels too foreign, it's like, well, which parts of this do I know I absolutely do not want to do? Which parts of this always feel bad to me when I say yes to them? How can we at least start practicing releasing the parts that absolutely tank our quality of life? So when we fit in too many patients into our clinic day, when we push ourselves in the hospital or ER setting to see two more patients than we can tell we have capacity for, that is ignoring our quality of life. And that has an impact. Even if we checked off the box of like, see, I'm a good worker and you're welcome, I crossed some people off the wait list, I question the quality of care we can offer. I'm sure you can offer great quality of care even when you're totally burnt out, but you could offer better quality of care, I promise you, if you were resourced and rested and doing things that felt good, choosing what you want to offer, choosing when you do it, choosing the timing of how you do it. Like, maybe it's no one's favorite to do forms, but you don't currently yet have someone set up to help delegate if forms are part of your work. But you could at least say, well, I'm definitely not doing it now. I hate feeling rushed. I do them on my back porch once a month with a glass of wine, and that's how I can have a good time doing forms. That's not my personal example. I feel like someone said that they do exactly that. I can't remember now. But like, how do you acknowledge and account for and plan for how you can make this a quality experience for you, and have a palliative approach to how you make those decisions day to day, right? And the last thing is that mortality acknowledgement, and like really knowing like, this job is not forever. In two ways. So first of all, this job is not forever. Like, there is a prognosis on whatever role you hold. Even like for me, I still have this romantic idea that I'm going to be in this practice for my entire career, and that still feels good. I'm also open to if at some point that no longer feels good, but for now it does feel really lovely. But with that, I'm definitely not going to see all of my patients from birth to death. I hope not. Like, patients are supposed to outlive me if they were born during my time here. And so like, I'm only ever going to see part of people's story, even though I, as a family doctor, see a lot of people's story. So I can't be the one and only very special, unique, bestest doctor of all time. Like, instead, it's like, I'm here for this period of time. Am I doing succession planning and thinking through who can help replace me? As you may know, if you've heard more than one episode, I do that even in the present, though I'm not planning to leave my practice. Like, even from in the day-to-day, like weekly thing, I now have nurse practitioners who help me care for my patients and already sort of signal that like replaceability, and that I am a person holding a role for people versus like they're one life raft in the middle of a storm, you know? And I think that's important. And then also the mortality acknowledgement of like, I literally don't know how much time I have on this earth. And we get reminders of that every day in our job, right? The 4,000 weeks are not guaranteed. I may get 2,000. Like, I have no idea. 2,000 would be like up, my time's almost up, actually. So I'm almost 40. So, like, say that's true. How would that shift what I choose to prioritize today? And how can every day we know, like, it's a cliche to be like live every day like it's your last, but there's also, I think we can live every day as if it's not quite our last, but having that in the room of knowing I don't know how many more of these days I have. Like, what is it that I want to say to this patient that I haven't said yet? What is it that I want to do in this clinical role that I haven't done yet? Not in terms of like piling on more work, but often letting parts of work go. What parts do you hate and just want to stop? You know, and remembering that you are mortal. Both your role is mortal and you are mortal. And we actually don't know which is going to end first. So, like, useful to think about, right? And so, like, that's on a day to day basis, you could be applying the palliative approach to your day to day decision making, your day to day, like, career decisions. And also, like, taking that step back and thinking, what would be your advanced care plan for your entire career? Do you have a sense of like what you hope over the course of your career you bring into your life? If your whole person was better expressed through all the different things you did in your work, what would be kinds of work you'd be interested in like seeking out at some point? What are interesting things that you'd love to use your skills to do? And being unafraid to look at that, because I think sometimes it's like, no, I have to be happy with what I have. And I mean, that's kind of the whole point, is we just don't know how much time there is. And so, like, what would be a great quality of life? One example I can think of in terms of quality of life that was like longer term planning for sure was me and my office mates have been trying to find a new clinic location for many, many years, and have had many false starts and attempts and things fall through in various ways that have caused a lot of stress and difficulty. And yet it was clear to all of us, we all had an advanced care plan, if you will, for like, we do want to be in a space that feels better to us. The old space was fine, but the new space has windows and a bunch of other things. I won't get into all of the nitty gritty, but like, it has other things that, like, honestly, when I walk into that office, I'm so deeply grateful for all the past versions of myself and my colleagues, my co-owners of the practice, for all of the false starts and all of the attempts, because that all got us to here, where now we're in a space that more accounts for our quality of experience. And we continue to advocate for things that are needed even in this new space for quality of experience. Like right now, they're trying to fix the AC for us, you know? And so sometimes that stuff in the day-to-day grind, it's like, maybe I'll deal with it later. Oh, it's fine, it's fine. And you're just sort of like finding yourself through your life. But there's something about taking that step back of like, what if I get one life? What if I have this one wild life? What is it that would be so amazing and so neat to get to do with it? What am I like most interested in really doing? And it doesn't have to be what you do forever. That's the other thing about that mortality acknowledgement of like, things are meant to be temporary and transient. What do you want to contribute here and there? What feels good to you? What accounts for your whole personhood? So there you go. Those were all the ways I could think of applying this palliative approach, not only to patients in a way that, in my experience, always feels more satisfying, doesn't take a ton more time, sometimes takes less time. Because as I understand the whole person, I recognize I'm going to spend zero words and zero periods of time trying to convince them of this other thing, because they were quite clear about whatever it is that they know they would never want to do. So it's like, okay, that's off the menu then. Perfect. Don't have to have that whole conversation, you know? So like, it's very helpful and effective in a patient context, irrespective of their age, but also a palliative approach to projects, to committees, to leadership roles, to roles of any kind. And then to you as a person, both within your work and within your whole life. Like, how is it that you can remind yourself of what it feels like to be a whole person and all the parts of yourself that may be underexpressed right now? Considering your quality of life as a key factor before you make any kind of decision about what to do next for anything, honestly. And just reminding yourself that both you and every other human you encounter has limited time on earth, and having that help clarify what it is you want to do with that time and what it is you want to offer to others to do with their time. That's it. It's very much connected to that hospicing modernity concept that I had the author on for. I just love how this is like these three pillars that are so practical and is a way basically of hospicing what's dying in the whole system, what we want to start allowing to die in us, which is like the old shitty inhuman stories that were not serving us. All of the things that make you think you can't be a whole person, the things that mean that it's selfish to have quality of life, that means we should ignore mortality. All of those are the inhuman stories. So refocusing on these things, that's why I think human experience approach would be applicable. Like realistically thinking about what it means to be human is these three things. So yeah, I would love to know what this episode brings up for you. If you want to reach out to me on Instagram or reply to the email that comes into your inbox if you're subscribed, I would love to hear. And also just be checking if what I've described sounds really intriguing to you and you'd love a space for support to actually start having space in your life as a whole person. Keep listening over the next few weeks. Make sure you're subscribed to my emails on my website, joanchanmd.com. Because sometime soon, after I release this episode, I'm going to be letting you know more of the details of what that's going to look like in the fall. All right, healthcare humans, thanks so much for listening again, and I'll talk to you next time. I would love to take this work deeper with you. Visit joanchanmd.com today and discover my growing menu of options for restorative medical education to suit your learning needs. I offer one-on-one coaching, customized workshops, and self-study courses that allow you to connect not only with my work on a deeper level, but also with other healthcare humans just like you. So if you want to start humanizing your work in healthcare to a deeper level and do it in community with others, please visit joanchanmd.com and find those options and what fits you and your life today.